everyone, and welcome to the Squad Room Podcast, the place for cops who want to transform their leadership, create more resilience, and generate more balance in their life. On this show, we cover the tactics and strategies you can use every day to create a life worth living, both in and out of uniform. My name is Garrett Teslaw, and I'm a full-time lieutenant for a sheriff's office in Southern California, and I'm glad you're with us today. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind you of a few things. First, if you're on social media, make sure you're following us at The Squad Room and that you've liked our Facebook page. Also, make sure to join our Facebook group. Just search The Squad Room group to join. But most importantly is that you head over to thesquadroom.net and get signed up for our mailing list. People on that list get exclusive access to free resource downloads and a weekly email from me on things you need to know about. I also send out content that's exclusive to that list, so don't miss out on something that can help you in your life or in your job. Join our list at thesquadroom.net. This episode is sponsored by officerprivacy.com. In the age of the internet, social media, and smartphones, there's so much amazing information at our fingertips. I can research any topic or person I want to and learn all about them, their family, and way more information than I really should be able to. The problem is, people can do that research on us too. Whether we like it or not, our information is on the internet, out there for people to find, even the bad guys. Just accepting this and doing nothing isn't an option. We as cops have a giant target on our back these days. Sometimes that's literal and it's life or death, and other times it's just dealing with potential harassment. Either way, we don't want to expose our families to these risks. Being careful about what you post on social media doesn't go far enough. It's easy for a bad guy with an iPhone and free Wi-Fi to hunt you down. That's why officerprivacy.com exists. My friend Pete James is the founder, and he spent 25 years in law enforcement here in California, using much of his career to hunt down the criminals and evidence on the computers and the internet that we now use. Pete knows how easy it is to find you, and since he's one of the good guys, he can help. OfficerPrivacy.com offers 2 packages to choose from to help you clean up your side of the internet. Their premium service allows you to sit back and let the professionals do the work, where they will work to scrub the internet's top 50 people search sites that can expose your home address. Then they work to maintain your privacy by monitoring those same sites. If you show up again, they will remove you again. They also offer an at-home solution for those of you that have the time and the technical ability to do it yourself. I don't, so that's why I use their premium service, but you can do it all yourself using their proprietary software. You can remove yourself and your family members from these same top 50 people search sites on the internet, and then use the software to conduct audits as often as you'd like to make sure that you haven't been added back. To learn more about how you can keep safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room. You know, when we think about the equipment we carry with us on our person, we often assume that it's our sidearm that's the most important. But I disagree. Sure, it's important. But think about how important your radio is and how often you use it. Statistically, you're likely to go your entire career without ever firing your sidearm. However, you won't go more than a few minutes in patrol without using your radio. It's your lifeline to the outside world. It's how we call for help, set up a perimeter, request an ambulance, or maybe a supervisor. And think about it. If you do end up using your sidearm on duty, it's very likely that the next thing you'll use is your radio to tell dispatch, shots fired. Our radios are incredibly important to our jobs and to help keep us and our partners safe. And it's important to make sure that you're using quality equipment. We can't control the quality of the radio we're issued by our department, but we can often control some of the accessories that we use to make them better and make us safer. I'm proud that CommGear Supply is a sponsor of this episode. Head over to commgearsupply.com and you will see their massive inventory of microphones, earpieces, speakers, batteries, headsets, push-to-talk sets, and everything else you need to help you stay in comms and stay safe. Their customer service team will help you make sure you get the right accessories compatible with your system. Now here's the coolest part about CommGear Supply and why I'm so proud that they work with us. They have a line of duty protection warranty on many of their products. Yeah, that's right. If your gear ever breaks in the line of duty, they'll replace it. And prices are tax-free, and it's always free shipping on orders inside the U.S. and even to some parts of Canada. Go to commgearsupply.com right now and use that coupon code THESQUADROOM to get 10% off your order. Make sure you also follow them on Instagram at commgearsupply and let them know that you appreciate their support of the show. My guest today is Wendy Hummel, seasoned law enforcement officer with over 24 years of law enforcement experience. Wendy started her career in 1996 as a special agent with the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Now known more often as Customs and Border Patrol, or some version of that. She retired at the rank of detective after 21 years of service from the Wichita Police Department, where she spent the majority of her career working Persons Crimes Investigations. Wendy's worked homicide, gang, and sex crime cases, and she's also a member of her department's critical incident stress management, and defensive tactics teams. Wendy's areas of expertise is officer health and wellness, peer support, and resiliency, and she's currently the health and wellness coordinator for the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. Wendy holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in criminal justice. She's also a certified yoga instructor and an affiliate and partner with Yoga for First Responders, or an ambassador for Yoga for First Responders. And we're going to talk to her about yoga. And she's also a trainer for the Pause First Academy, which is run by our past guest and good friend, Kim Colegrove. Not one to sit still, Wendy is also an adjunct faculty member in the Criminal Justice Department at Wichita State University. You can get more information on her at her website, wendyhummel.com. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation. We've been chatting. Well, I was on your show. You all have your own podcast too. Of all the accolades I just listed off in your very busy life, one of those other things is as a podcast host yourself, the Guns and Yoga podcast, which I have been kind enough to be invited on by you. So that was a couple months ago, and this is long in the making, and it's nice to have you here.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate you coming on my show because, truth be told, I think I told you this before, but you are a big inspiration as to why I was able to start my podcast.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I always like to hear that, we're putting out something that helps other people move forward as well. That's the whole point.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that long career, 24 years, major crimes detective, all those things. But the thing I'm most interested in is your current assignment or your current job, where you're the wellness coordinator, health and wellness coordinator for the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. Can you tell us about how that job came to be, and what does that job even entail? Because I think the idea that there is someone assigned to health and wellness at an agency is probably pretty foreign to a lot of people who are listening to this.
Yeah, sure. So just to back up, about 5 or 6 years before I retired from the agency I retired from, I had started to do some of these things collaterally. And probably just like everyone else who gets into this stuff, it came because of personal reasons. I needed to find something to make myself mentally, physically, and emotionally kind of better. I personally struggled, noticed coworkers were struggling with different things, and I now know a lot more about just the side effects of the type of work that we do, the lack of sleep, the poor nutrition, just all of it, the secondary trauma. So it's something that I became very passionate about. And then when I retired, the sheriff's office, which just like other agencies or other towns, you have a sheriff's office and then you have the police department that are side by side. The sheriff is very forward thinking, someone who I had previously worked for at the police department before he ran for sheriff. And he'd seen a need to really try to support the people at the sheriff's office when it came to mental and emotional wellness and physical as well, but really wanted to start with peer support. And so when my position was created a few years ago, it was more of, hey, we need to do something. You create it, figure it out, let's implement it. And that's really kind of how it started. He knew I had been doing some of these things for several years, knew he wanted to do something to support the people who work there, and pretty much gave me, honestly, free reign in a way to just really do a lot of research, reach out to a lot of places, a lot of other agencies. I didn't recreate the wheel, and I definitely didn't do it alone. This is definitely an agency effort. So that's kind of how it all got started.
What was your process like? We share a similarity in that we were noticing these things first in ourselves and having to try and resolve these things for ourselves first, right? And that's truly what started the squad room for me, was having worked through some of those things, or starting to work through some of those things, and then realizing there's some things that work better than others, and that some things I was having success with, and I was sharing those things at work and was getting feedback on that, and then decided to share some of those wins and losses and struggles publicly here. But for you, what were you doing at work that people knew you as the person doing this personal development work? Does that make sense? Like, were you just advertising it, talking about it constantly? How did people come to associate you with that kind of work?
So it was probably the yoga thing, quite honestly. So it was, and back when we first introduced yoga to the Wichita Police Department in 2016, it it wasn't received quite the same back then as it is now. Let
I
me
can
put it that
imagine.
way.
I
So,
can imagine.
but here for me personally, like I started doing yoga probably 12 or 13 years ago. And for me, it started because I wanted to lose baby weight. I had my kids later, had a lot of medical issues. And now I know looking back because of the type of work I did, my immune system, my nervous system, my endocrine system was very like jacked up. So I had a lot of issues getting pregnant, staying pregnant. And then when I did have my two pregnancies older, I had a lot of complications. And so after having both of my girls 3.5 years apart, 10 weeks early, 2 pounds each, a lot, like I
Hmm.
said, lots of medical issues. I needed to lose weight because that was kind of my goal. And so I started doing yoga. And then I quickly realized that yoga was a lot more impactful and beneficial than just dropping weight because I started doing hot yoga. And I noticed that I was more patient off the mat. So, and I was still working persons crimes, still having to work long hours, get called in. And I just noticed a difference. And I didn't know why, though. I knew I felt better. I knew I felt different. And I knew it had to do with yoga, but I didn't understand until I started to study it why it made me feel better. And so, light bulb moment, I guess, it was kind of a gradual thing. But then I realized, if this can help me feel better and improve my mental and physical health, how can I help my brothers and sisters, right? Because my whole career I had worked and served the community, and I absolutely loved working persons crimes, but I started to slowly shift my focus on wanting to help another component of the community, which is the people that serve, the helpers. So I actually just did a Google search, right? It was yoga and cops. And I came up with Yoga for First Responders. It was a brand new at that time organization. And then, like any cop probably would, I vetted it and I spoke with the director, and she seemed legitimate. So, and obviously she is. And then I just said, you know what, I need to go to her training. And so I got with the captain over training at the time. And this is, like I said, 2016, 6 years ago. And I was also going through separately from that my own yoga teacher training, independent of anything with the agency, because I wanted to study yoga. I never thought I would teach it. But then I heard of Yoga for First Responders, and I said, I need to go to this training. So I said, I'm going to go regardless if you send me or not, but I'd love it if you would send me because I'd like to come back and teach it. And that's what happened. It was received very well. It was embraced by the people that were up in training at the time. Went to training, came back, and never looked back since. So
Yeah, interesting. I and we'll talk more in depth about yoga, I think, in a bit here, because there's so many misconceptions about it. It's kind of whatever you make of it, really, is my experience with it. But it is the one thing that I think saved me from a back surgery just last year. So
good.
I have a different a different experience with it as well. But yeah, we'll dive into that because I think there's a lot of, like I said, misconceptions about it. So the health and wellness coordinator, what on a daily basis, what does that job do?
That's a really good question. So when I first started, like I said, one of the first things that I did is I just started to learn as much as I possibly could about what other people were doing, because there are other agencies that have like not just a wellness coordinate wellness person, but they have wellness units. And I know
Mm.
it's still not something that's very mainstream. So I started to reach out and try to see what was happening across the country. That was kind of the first thing I did. I also researched and looked at what was going on the federal level. I applied for a COPS grant, the LEMWA grant, Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act. So our agency was actually a recipient of that for 2 years. And we were able to start our program and help support our peer support program. So a lot of just research at first, reaching out, calling people basically across the country and trying to figure out, what do I do? Where do we go? And so after that, like I said, my sheriff had pretty much said, I really want to start with peer support. One of the things that I did in doing all this research was I kind of just put together my own like infograph or model of what I thought a comprehensive wellness program should look like. And it has about 6 or 8 different components, obviously mental, emotional, physical, family, training, and different things like that. So we started to kind of target the training and the family and the peer support. Those were the first 3 areas that we kind of started with. And so it's been several years now. We've trained 35 peer supporters on our agency that's been funded by this grant. And, just like anything else, cops, there's 2 things I like to say cops don't like. It's change and the way things are.
Sure,
so,
absolutely.
so it's really, I mean, you're never going to get everybody to buy into this. But it's really, I've seen a significant change over the last few years. And I don't just mean at the agency I'm at, I mean, just across the nation too.
Oh,
The
for sure.
awareness. Yeah, and it's really encouraging because there's a lot more support, and so the momentum has really propelled with our program, and so we're most likely going to be expanding. So it won't just be me because I teach recruits, I teach agency members, I still teach yoga for first responders, I teach resilience classes. And then I'm also researching, running the peer support team, trying to, look at different options, different models. Some agencies have their own in-house therapists, some contract out. So there's a lot of different moving parts day in and day out of things that I'm responsible for.
Mhm.
So, but it's an evolving kind of a thing because it's so new. But I have to say the thing that's probably been the most valuable. So if there's anyone listening who is just in the beginning stages of starting a wellness unit, is really just reaching out and talking to people who are already doing it. In Kansas, we have a really phenomenal resource. It's called First Midwest. It's a nonprofit organization, but it's run by people who have been doing peer support across the state of Kansas for many, many years. And we've now come to where there's a statewide training. Everybody in the state, we're encouraging to go to the same training so that we can assist each other. So if we've got something that happens at our agency, we can have others come and assist us and vice versa. So it's really nice. It's not just limited to our agency. We support each other across the state. And then
Mhm.
I was assigned to a couple of people from the Nashville Police Department as a result of a different federal program called CryTech. It's sort of like a grant program, but you don't really have to apply. It's not a grant. You get matched with subject matter experts. And it's not just for wellness. There's other areas that you can do this with. But over the past year, I was matched up with them and also Sherry Martin, the National FOP Wellness Coordinator. So I got really lucky because I got some really phenomenal experts that basically guided me. Every 2 weeks we talked for about a year and did an exchange, and they gave me input and went back and forth, and they kind of looked at what our agency needed and what the dynamic was, and really helped kind of give us some really good advice on how to move forward.
A lot of people listening, I think, are, like I said earlier, are the idea of a health and wellness coordinator in a unit is so progressive to them that just the idea that you're in place as a solo, a one-person unit. But you said you reached out to other people. Who are the agencies that are even light years ahead of you, or that are really on the tip of the spear in terms of pushing wellness and officer safety wellness into the conversation?
Yeah, so definitely the Nashville Police Department and Indianapolis also. There's a lot of others that I can't think of off the top of my head who I actually got to meet just recently at the National FOP Wellness Conference in Nashville. But those 2 stand out for sure. And I think Indianapolis actually mentored the Nashville Police Department. So that's what's so cool about all of this is that, everybody's connected because even though it's
Mhm.
growing, it's still, like you said, it's still not really as common as it should be. And so there's just this ripple effect. It's really cool. People who are trying to do this work really get to know each other, and everybody wants to help get
Mhm.
everybody else started.
I know on the West Coast, San Diego is a big agency. They're obviously a big agency, but they're huge proponents of this stuff, and they are one of the ones who has a massive unit of officers dedicated to a variety of different parts of the wellness
Hmm.
continuum or whatever. But it's cool. I had not heard Indianapolis in that mix, so it's nice to see a major agency like that, picking up the guidon and leading.
Yeah, and I have heard of San Diego too. I'm just not personally familiar with them, so I would love to go take a trip out there.
Yeah, there's lots of good reasons to go to San Diego.
Yeah.
That's one of them. So one of the things I've heard you talk about before, and this goes to our health and our wellness, is negativity.
Hmm.
And it's like baked into our job, right? Like it's the negativity that can keep you safe on a car stop because it takes the form of cynicism and suspicion, but it really begins to fester in all these other areas of our lives on top of the fact that we're just human. So I was hoping you could walk us through some of your thoughts on how negativity plays a part in our health and our wellness as first responders or as cops.
Yeah, well, and the whole reason that I really became interested in this topic, it's just like anything else, we teach what we most need to learn or we most need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of figuring things out for myself, just like everything else. Like, how can I change my mindset? How can I
Mm-hmm.
stop from, kind of going down this rabbit hole of negativity? I found myself there quite a bit. And and I think you probably know this, but human beings are wired for negativity. It's just kind of how we're made, and it was intended to keep us safe and alive. I mean, back in caveman days, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
geared towards looking for the threats to keep us safe and alive, which of course doesn't necessarily serve us in modern day, but when we're on the job, we obviously need to be aware, or we need to be what's called quote unquote hyper vigilant. Some people like that word, some don't. Which means our nervous system is constantly being activated every time that we're on high alert. But with the negativity bias, the problem is that when we're constantly in that state of negativity, that can really take its toll on our mindset and our physiology. And that's kind of the thing that really kind of was a wake up call for me, is that how deeply connected what we think and our health are to one another. They're really not separate. I mean, I think people, used to hear the term mind body connection and, oh, that doesn't mean anything. Well, we know that that's not true now. We've got
Mm-hmm.
research, we've got scientific evidence that tells us that the two are it's all one system. We're all one person. And so to be, negativity can really take its toll. And because we are wired for negativity, you actually have to kind of look back and see, why am I being so negative and what can I do to offset that? So, and I know people don't like to hear this, but just to think positively, that's not what I'm saying. But one way to kind of offset that is to maybe savor things that are positive when they happen, which I don't think that we do enough of. I think we're all geared towards negativity, that we forget about all the good things that happen too, and we kind of let them slide. I think there's some kind of research study that says for um, like it outweighs it 7 to 1. So like we remember the bad things, and like our brain is like Teflon for the positive stuff, and it's like Velcro for the negative stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
if something positive happens, just really intentionally taking a moment to savor the good experience so it gets stored in your long-term memory.
So one ways of that is gratitude, right?
Yeah. Oh
And,
yeah.
and just and having a gratitude. Do you have a gratitude practice that you use or that you've implemented, or is it part of your yoga, or what are the things you do on that front?
Yes, yes, and yes. I'm a big fan of gratitude. And more recently, I'm in this 2-year yoga health coaching program. I've started doing holistic health coaching with some people in the criminal justice field, and not just cops. But one of the books that we had to read as part of our program is called The Gap and the Gain. And it's a book that was written by Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coaching. And it's this framework of looking at things in either gap mindset or gain mindset. And when you're in the gap, it means that you're looking at what you haven't yet done. And so everybody has an ideal or a goal that we're trying to achieve or strive for. But when you're looking in the lens of gap thinking, you're thinking, well, I'm not there yet. Like, so an example would be like if you want to try to run a marathon and you haven't yet started training, and a month later you're up to 3 miles. You're not running 26 miles, but you're running 3 miles. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in gap thinking, you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much further to go. I have to, I've only been able to do this. But if you're in gain thinking, you remind yourself intentionally every single day of things that you have done, that you have accomplished. So you're measuring your progress from where you started backwards. So if you look at yourself and you say, well, I can run 3 miles now, where I couldn't have done that a month ago. So just training yourself, not just to practice gratitude. So to answer your original question, I have a gain journal and a gratitude practice. So I do that every single day. In the morning and in the evening, I take just 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Some days I journal longer than that. It's one of my favorite practices to do. But I always think of 3 things that I have accomplished that day, and they can be very small wins. They don't have to be big, giant, big, hairy, audacious goals that I've done. Maybe it's that I went for a walk. Maybe it's that I spent some time with my daughter. Maybe it's that I was able to accomplish, completing a podcast episode or something, or something at work. And then I always end with, this is what I'd like to focus on the following day. And one of the reasons why that's so powerful, especially the evening practice, is that I think it was Thomas Edison that quoted it. It was in the book. Never go to bed without a request from your subconscious. And so you say, hey, tomorrow I want to, this is something I want to work on. And it's kind of like, it's hard to really put into words because this has happened to me. Like, when you're in the shower and you get this great idea, it just comes to you. It's kind of like that. You kind of put this out into the universe, into your journal, like, hey, this is something I need to work on. And then you wake up and all of a sudden you're just like, oh, you have this really good idea, or something comes to you. So gratitude and a gain journal, those are my go-to practices as of late.
I've never heard of a gain journal. That's really cool. Is there a specific journal you use for that, or is it just an open, like a blank notebook that you put these things down in?
Yeah, I've tried the fancy journal thing. I go and I get like 99-cent tablets because I like to write a lot, and that's what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
It's similar to a conversation I was having with someone this morning about in this gain idea, like looking back at the things we've accomplished and feeling good about those things, and how we don't allow ourselves to appreciate that. Again, probably looking at the negativity and like expecting that there's more work to be done, but there's a lot of power in sitting with that and appreciating yourself for that. And it gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, I think, when they have to objectively look at something they've accomplished, and even if they haven't gotten to the end of the goal, but they've made some significant strides on it, it gets uncomfortable for people to sit with themselves and feel good about themselves.
Mm-hmm. Very. You're right. Yeah. And it's a practice. It's not, it doesn't come easy, but like I said, I mean, this is something that it wasn't very natural. And it took a while for me to kind of get into this momentum for it to click, because I tend to be a very goal oriented person. Like, I need to accomplish this, this, and this. And, oh, I haven't done this yet. I'm not like that anymore. And I'm not saying I don't fall back into those old patterns, because those neural pathways are deep. So they could take a while to kind of reframe, or to, regroove the path. But it's really powerful. Like, if I sit back for a minute and I look at what I did do, I'm proud of myself. And it really does change the way that I think. And it might sound weird to say that out loud, but it really does work. And I try to share that with anybody that I can, because it seems kind of simple, but it's very, very powerful. At least it has been for me.
After the riots and unrest of the summer of 2020, I began to get increasingly concerned about the fact there's so much of my life that is out there accessible to the public. And yes, I know that I'm a public figure in some sort of way, but even then, it still makes me uncomfortable. And I've been trying to figure out where the line should be drawn between what is shared on this podcast or on social media or in interviews I give, and what should remain private for the security and safety of my family. Even though I'm a public person, that doesn't mean I want my personal information out there for the bad guys to find. I've arrested enough of them in my career that it makes me nervous to think that my family could be exposed to those dangers. Not long ago, a suspect showed up at the front door of my partner's house, 45 miles away from the station. I've had enough of worrying about it and felt completely outmatched by the internet. I mean, it's the internet. Trying to take my name off of Google seems insurmountable, and I learned that, honestly, it is. But there's a lot that we can do to protect ourselves, and that's removing our names from people's search sites and breaking the links between our home address and our names. I learned all this from my friends at OfficerPrivacy.com, who are helping me to clean up my side of the internet. A quick Google search shows just a shocking amount of information about where I live, where I used to live, my family members, their names, their addresses, and even phone numbers. We need help protecting ourselves from the bad guys. You have partners on your beat, so get a partner on the internet. To learn more about how they can keep you safe, check them out at officerprivacy.com/the squad room. When you sign up through that link, you'll get a free USB data blocker, and your first month of monitoring is free. That's officerprivacy.com/the squad room. How many times have you damaged your gear while on duty? Chances are it's a lot. So why don't companies have a protection guarantee to replace gear that has been damaged in the line of duty? Gear Supply is the first and only tactical communication company that has a line of duty warranty that will cover the damages to some of your most critical communication gear. Every month, Gear Supply saves cops all around North America about $1,500 because they replace damaged gear due to cracked housing, pulled cables, water damage, and more. Me personally, I always pulled cables on my radio gear. From physical altercation to an accidental drop, Gear Supply has you protected with that line of duty warranty. You can find tactical headsets, push-to-talks, earpieces, mics, and so much more in their line of duty collection. You can also check out gear from Otto, Silence, Invisio, and other reputable brands at the best prices available. You can also check out gear from Otto, Silence, Invisio, and other reputable brands at the best prices available. Find all-time favorites like the Noise Barrier Micros from Otto or the XPR Push-to-Talk from Silence. With year-round sales, tax-free prices, and free shipping, you're guaranteed to get quality communication gear at a fair price. Go to comgearsupply.com right now and use that coupon code THESQUADROOM to get 10% off your order. Make sure you also follow them on Instagram at comgearsupply and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Squad Room. I think, too, as cops, we have two things that are working against us in that way, right? One is from day one of the academy, you're taught you're not special, shut up, don't showboat, don't be a peacock, and we learn to close ourselves down to some of those ideas that we're good at things or that we've accomplished something or that we should even be proud of ourselves, right? And the last thing you want to be is the guy at work or the gal at work that's out there and everyone else is like, oh, look at them, think they're a big deal, think they're such a hot shot. And so we take that from ourselves or we give that up. We give that power away to other people out of a fear of looking like we're, bragging or we're showboating. And it's like, and I think it's easy to understand, you don't want to maybe have an outward appearance of doing those things, but eventually you take away even doing it inside your own head, having a moment to yourself to say, hey, that was a good job. You did you should be proud of that. Now you're talking to yourself here, but or saying, I am proud of what I did here, or look what I've accomplished. And when we can't celebrate those wins openly, I think we do start to turn that voice off inside our own head. And eventually we stop giving ourselves credit for the things we've accomplished. And that is a road towards, I think, depression or anxiety or and anger and all those other things, because we can't acknowledge the positive things in our life that are going on or the positive things that we're doing to affect the change we want to see or get to the place we want to be or achieve the goal we want to achieve. And the second thing out of that I think is unique to us is we are a unique people. The people in this profession there is no other job like it in the world, and there never will be any way to replicate this job for anyone who's not a cop. And I'm speaking specifically to cops, but you could say firemen are the same way. A cop can't replicate the job of a fireman. And we are surrounded by these people who do this kind of insane work. This kind of if you wrote out the real job description of a cop, not the thing that they put on the job posting flyer to get you in the door, but the day-to-day work you have to do, that job would be insane, right? And here we are surrounded by people who do the same job as we do. And it kind of reinforces that idea that you're not special. But what we miss, and no offense to anyone else listening who's not a cop, but if what we miss is that just because you're in the job makes you that much more special or makes you that much more courageous or that much more unique or powerful or whatever it is. And, it's like the frog in the pot of boiling water sort of analogy. You're there long enough and you forget to realize that what you're doing is extraordinary work. You're just surrounded by other people who are also doing extraordinary work. And all of a sudden that seems to become mundane, and you forget about how like massive and impactful the job actually is. I know, sorry for the rant right there, but I think it was literally a conversation I was having this morning about this.
Yeah, no, and there's so many things that you made me think of, but one thing I can say personally is like when you're in it, like when you're a fish swimming in the water, you don't realize what's going on, right? And I didn't really even notice or realize some of these things until I retired and I got away from it. Now I'm still in and around law enforcement. I'm doing a completely different job. I'm pretty much a program manager now, but so you don't know it because you're just in it. And that's just the way it is. It's the culture. So, and I don't know why, and I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this show.
You go right ahead.
Okay. And I'm not doing it on purpose, but it's like, this is the only word that I know sometimes to capture what I'm about to say is that sometimes I don't know why we're so mean to each other in this job. And I tell my 16-year-old daughter, I'm like, people are assholes. Like, and I know Dr. Gilmartin would get mad because he says that that's the kind of stuff we say. Everybody's an asshole, but really, I'm not saying everyone is, but that's just kind of the best word I can use to describe it. I don't know why we're like that to each other when what we need to be doing is coming together and supporting each other. So sometimes the environment, breeds that kind of thing where they want to keep, they want to keep you down or want to keep you small. But what I tell my daughter is that it's usually about them and not about you. And
Sure.
you need to still, make sure that you take care of yourself and don't downplay what you're doing because you don't need to brag. You still be humble. So all the things that I'm talking about aren't things that I want you to like, I'm telling her to like post on social media. Here's all the great things I've done. But I think it's important to constantly remind yourself of everything that you've accomplished and everything that you've done. And I do think it's important to tell someone else. I don't think you need to tell everybody, but an accountability partner, somebody who's kind of you can trust, that's also you're supporting them, they're supporting you, I think is huge too.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Cornermen or having someone in your corner is so important. And
Yeah.
whether it's a mentor or someone of the same age or same background, someone you can go to with those things. I think we talk about amazing people doing amazing work, but it also, this culture we have organizationally sets us up for that, I think, asshole approach,
Mhm.
from
Yeah.
from day one of the academy, you're ranked by pretty much everything you do. You're ranked by your
Mhm.
test scores, your physical fitness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, your firearm scores, physical, and then you come out of training and you're ranked as the low man on the totem pole for shift assignments, and you're clawing and scratching your way to get to the better assignments based on seniority, right? And then you get those, and then you're testing for promotion, and there's only 2 spots, but there's 10 people who want them. And so throughout our careers, we exist in a place of scarcity, or from a
Mhm.
mindset of scarcity, I think, you know,
Yeah.
and we are kind of unintentionally, but by the way we are structured, pitted against each other, and it's this weird dynamic where you absolutely depend on these people to save your life, and you trust them implicitly with that responsibility. But when it comes to testing for a promotion, say, then we really, our egos start to take control of ourselves, and we really dig into that, coming from a place of scarcity in this.
Oh, absolutely. And I can even you made me think of something I haven't thought about in a really long time is like, I didn't ever pass or promote past the rank of detective, but when I did test for detective, trust me, when I got promoted, I heard about it because the only reason I got promoted is because I was a woman. It didn't
Sure.
matter that I was number one on the list out of the whole list, or when I got a certain position. And this didn't just happen to me. This happened to other people as well. And so instead of supporting each other, which is very difficult for some of us to do, we can be our own worst enemy sometimes.
Oh yeah. And it's such an interesting dynamic, and that's why I think this field is just starting to come into its own, because you have
Hmm.
the organizational elements like we were just talking about, you have the internal dynamic, and then you have that hypervigilance that you mentioned
Hmm.
that eventually starts to uh, you know really sink us from a physiological standpoint. And so, like, in my moments where I step back and look, and it's like every cop is going through some version of this in some way, and some are managing it fantastically well, and they're fighting the fight against those physiological issues and reactions to, bad sleep, trauma, et cetera, and other people are having a much graver fight with it. But we're all existing in our own worlds while we also have to live in this universe of coworkers, and then of course dealing with the public.
Oh yeah.
And that's like, no
Yeah.
wonder everyone is struggling.
Well, and I think that's why I think personally peer support, and I know sometimes that word means different things to different people depending on what your program or your experience is, but really, really embedding that into the culture of your agency, like truly, not
Mhm.
just saying I have a peer support team or not just this is what we do after a critical incident. It's all of the beforehand stuff, laying the
Mhm.
groundwork, really reaching out to people, having a system in place, and having the right people. And it's not just about the people on the team, it's about everybody throughout the entire agency learning that it's important to support each other on some level. And I think that we are headed in that direction, but cultural evolution takes some time. But I agree with you. I do think that some of that we're headed in the right direction because it has to change. It does. We have to be there for each other.
What's your experience with generationally the acceptance of these ideas, from the old school cops who started in the would be probably early 90s. Right now people are looking at retiring, maybe even to the 80s a little bit, to the men and women who are just coming on the street now. What is there a difference in how they adopt and react to these techniques, or their willingness to listen?
Oh yeah, I think so. So one of the things I do at my current job is I teach recruits. We do a lot of wellness stuff up front, talk to them about peer support, and they really. First of all, what I find is that a lot of them are already familiar with some of these things, whereas 5 years ago you would have said compassion fatigue or resilience, and they may not know what those words meant.
Hmm.
Now it's very different. I say, hey, who's ever meditated or done yoga? And half of them will raise their hands, whether it be in sports or some of them were in the military. So that has definitely changed. They're familiar with it and they embrace it. I've noticed overall, not every single one of them, they're a
Sure.
lot more open to it. And then with that being said, like the people that are my age, so I'm 53, a lot of the people that I worked with, that are still with my former agency are either getting ready to retire or have retired, I've noticed two different things. Um, Still that old school mentality, and they're still there. And then people who have had a realization out of necessity, typically like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, things need to change, or else I'm going to go down this rabbit hole and not be healthy the rest of my the rest of my retirement, the rest of my life. So
Hmm.
it kind of has split, I've noticed. And then you've got those people, the halfway people, those hybrid people that are about maybe 40 years old that are like halfway old school and halfway new school, as we call it. I've got a couple of people on the peer support team that came up with that. So it's just it's kind of an interesting mix, but I definitely see that this younger generation embraces this a lot more. Now, I have heard some of the old school people say, well, they're too soft. This generation is this or that. They'll almost like overboard. So
Uh-huh.
I'm not saying I think that, but I definitely know that they are very much more open to these kinds of things.
Yeah, I don't think it's a generation unless you complain about the weakness of the generation immediately coming after you in some way,
Yeah.
right? I've seen the same thing, almost exactly the same description of it. I think one of the things that when people complain about the 20 somethings coming into the profession right now, they often complain about their ability to self advocate. Well, they're not going to
Mhm.
work an 80-hour work week. They're going to work their 40 and go home. Overtime's not a priority. Uh, you know, Giving their all to the department is not their thing. It's not a career for them. It's a job. And I see those things not as complaints, but as positive traits.
Mhm.
They know what they want, and they're not going to get bamboozled by the department when they get browbeaten into do it for the good of the department, because they know, well, what's in it for me, or what do I get out of this? This is a two-way street, and they're treating it that way. And so they self-advocate much faster and much more clearly than my generation or previous generations. But they've grown up with that language, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
They've grown up in the idea that mindfulness has been around a little bit, or meditation's been around a little bit. They have older brothers and sisters who may be into some of these things, and so yeah, they're much more open to it. I remember doing a briefing on meditation because I was that kind of sergeant. I would sit and do a briefing and like, here's how to do a meditation. And I was working with a group that was, probably, late 30s or so. And I had one brand new guy, brand new. And I asked everybody if they had any sort of a meditation practice. And he's the only one who raised their hand and was kind of stunned,
Mm-hmm.
And he's, oh yeah, every day basically is kind of what he said. And it was no big deal. And it was cool to see him willing to put his hand up and talk about it like that too, in front of a group of, kind of veteran cops who were suspicious of it or curious,
Yeah.
dubious maybe is the right word about it, you know? So one of the things that we've touched on a little bit is the yoga. And I want to get into that a little bit because I've never done a full episode on it. I mentioned in the beginning that I rehabbed my back with that, prevented myself from having to have surgery. And I've had varying degrees of success with sticking with yoga throughout very different parts of my career. But I think first thing maybe is if you can dispel some of the myths or the rumors about what yoga is and what yoga isn't. And that's probably where we need to start that conversation for anyone who's about to turn us off.
Okay, let's do it. So I could talk for days on this topic. But I also know how to talk to cops about yoga. So really, just very briefly, the first thing I like to start out when I tell people, especially first responders, about yoga is that it started back probably over 5,000 years ago in India. And what a lot of people don't know, and I understand why, is that it used to only be practiced by men who are warriors preparing for battle. And so women weren't even allowed to practice yoga initially when it was first created, or the first evidence that we have of it. And so it was so that they could be mentally and physically prepared for battle. And so one of my favorite quotes that I like to tell the guys and girls when I teach is warriors have to be skilled in both action and non-action. And I think that kind of sums up why. And so fast forward, but what does yoga look like in the United States? It looks like mostly women practicing Lululemon yoga pants, being in these crazy positions. And that's what people think. Incense, some people associate spirituality and religion. And I'm not saying that certain religions have not adopted yoga, but that is not what yoga has to be. And so hopefully that's just kind of a very basic, like, so people understand where it came from. But to build on that, now we have, which is great, just like with meditation, we have research and evidence that backs up that the benefits of why yoga can be such a good practice to integrate. So when we're talking about the nervous system, because that's something that I think we can all relate to as cops, but really as human beings, everybody's nervous system gets activated, whether you get pissed off because of an email you get, or you're going and responding to maybe a shots fired, robbery in progress. I know they're different situations, but either situation, your nervous system gets activated. So that happens, I don't know how many times throughout the course of a day for a regular person, let alone someone who's a first responder. And so when that happens, there's a whole like flood of different stress hormones that go into our body, into our physiology. And if that happens too frequently, which oftentimes it does for people like us, that's when we get our health impacted, metabolic issues, insulin resistance, and things like that, that can lead to a whole host of physical types of issues and long-term health issues. So if you can control your nervous system, number one way that we do that, not just in yoga for first responders that I teach at the agency, but just in any yoga class I teach, is the breath. And that seems really simple, but it works. And so being able to use your breath to tap into your nervous system, the longest nerve in your body, it's the vagus nerve, it's the 10th cranial nerve, and it starts at the base of your brain, innervates into all the organs, the facial muscles, sides of the neck, into the gut. And so it's like a two-way, I say walkie-talkie, so I know that makes me sound old, but it's like a two-way communication system between the brain and the gut and everything in between. And so one way that you can tap into that vagus nerve, which helps to tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, is by breathing in a certain way. So that's one of the main components of any yoga class you'll go to, whether it be, yoga class at the local yoga studio, and for sure what we teach in yoga for first responders. So that's first and foremost. If I had to tell anybody one thing, it's learning how to use your breath to help control your nervous system and also post recovery. Like, when you get that adrenaline dump after a call, you're kind of ramped up. If you can practice tapping into that nervous system and being able to self-regulate and come back to balance or homeostasis, that will help resolve all of that a little bit quicker. And then, of course, there's other ways you can do that too, moving your body and drinking about a bunch of water. But another really good thing about yoga, you talked about your back. A lot of times cops get injured. And some of it is because we do a lot of sitting and because of the equipment that we wear, the vests, and depending on where, what your agency uses, the belts. And so we all have certain things in common that we struggle with: low back, hamstrings, core, even the front of our body. And so by moving your body in a certain way, any exercise is phenomenal. Moving your body, getting out and being able to do that is great. But a lot of times we don't move our body in different planes of movement. And when you practice jujitsu, martial arts, and CrossFit, you do. But if it's just like running or biking or weightlifting, it's that linear up and down. And so you train the way that you move, and you train the way that you need to perform. And I don't even just mean like cop stuff. I mean like sitting in your car, turning and looking to see if you can go. You could just turn your body, you're turning. So if you're training the way that you need to, you're less likely to get injured because you're moving laterally, flexing and extending and rotating. So that, and then another, and I'll kind of stop here, but a lot of times when we get injured too, and this is also very good to help prevent injury, is we usually focus on larger muscle groups. But in yoga, you're really focusing on those smaller stabilizing muscles, like around the knee and the ankles and places that you don't normally work. And so you're strengthening those too. So there's so many benefits. But I'll probably just stop there because I could go on and on. But really, really great practice for cops. And I can tell you, I've been teaching cops yoga since 2016. And once they come just one time, that's all it takes, because I recognize that I do like to embrace the woo. I like essential oils. I like teaching all kinds of yoga. But when we teach cops yoga, it's very culturally sensitive. We're culturally competent. We talk a certain way. We train at the academy. We do things that are going to be relevant to the type of work that we do. And there's a lot of crossover between a lot of defense tactics things that we teach and the class. So.
Yeah, I think the key issue, I think, for people to take out of it is the spiritual element is there as much or as little as you want it to be. And it really hasn't, it's almost an addition to it. It's really not part of the process of itself at all. And the flexibility that comes with it, this, and I mean, don't get me wrong too, yoga is hard. Like if you're doing it right, it's hard. You talked about those little stabilizer muscles, and I chuckled because I know how painful those little stabilizer muscles are, because you don't realize you have those muscles until you do something like yoga. But I mean, I was like a cliched back injury, right? Like a bulging disc that was causing like sciatica and numbness in my leg, blah, 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 right? But also combined with that was years and years and years of wearing a gun belt with a holster, cinched down in a car that was mashing into my right hip and was putting so much pressure on the fascia and the tissues and the nerves that I had to untangle all of that as well. And I went through every kind of PT you could try. I literally did everything you can try to do those things. And the only thing that started to unwind and untangle that was the yoga. And it just takes time, but came out of that with such a stronger balance on that side of my body as a result of it. And like I said, it saved me from from what was almost certainly a surgery, or even the other option was medical retirement.
Mm.
And so I tell that story for people who there's a real world application to it if you're not looking for the woo, and I enjoy a little woo. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
I like that part of it as well. I like the calming meditation part of it and the breathing,
Mhm.
but again, it's not necessary. So many people have Peloton bikes nowadays, and I've pointed people to just the Peloton apps yoga, which is actually quite good. For if you're starting out and you just need something and you just want to give it a
Mhm.
try, there's that. There's all sorts of resources out there to give it a shot and just give something a try. The breathing, now that's one that kind of crossover too with meditation. Someone asked me recently, they said, I don't know if I can meditate. I said, can you breathe? They said, yeah. I said, then you can meditate, because all it is breathing. It's not the absence of the thought, really. It's just about that focus on the breath. How do you introduce these concepts though when you walk into a room and you got a bunch of cops who are like, I don't know about this? How do you guys talk in that culture competent way to enlist them into their own recovery?
Well, just like anything else, I know cops are skeptical, so you have to
No, really?
explain. I know that I'm breaking news.
Yeah.
But so it's all about explain. To me, it's almost imperative that you tell them why before you do it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, and I like to give practical examples. Like, I'll usually say, "Hey, you're dispatched to this kind of a call. Walk me through what happened." It depends too on my audience. So if I have recruits, it's a lot different. They're a lot more
Mm-hmm.
open. And then if I have an audience of people who are been around for a little bit and some people who are a little bit more skeptical, just explaining it so that it's practical. Like, hey, what
Mm-hmm.
happens when you're on your way to a call? What happens to your respiration? What happens to your heart rate? And everybody knows what we're talking about, because we've all heard those people on the radio that you can't understand because they're not breathing.
Right.
So just kind of walking them through, well, hey, here's what happens in your brain. You have switched from this part of your brain to this part of your brain. Here's how you can tap in and go back to the prefrontal cortex, make better decisions. But honestly, the thing that I do, and I have permission from this person, is I give a real life account. I had a sergeant years ago when we first introduced this at the police department who told me, I walked them through a 3-part breath exercise when I first came back from my training. And this sergeant was involved in a shooting 2 weeks later, and he had been practicing the 3-part breath and told me, he said, "Hey, Wendy, I want to let you know this is what happened on my way to this call." Because now, obviously, he had the luxury of a little bit of time, and he was able to practice his breathing, and he credited it to being able to make a better decision. He was involved in a shooting. The suspect did not die, but everything was resolved and worked out okay. It was a robbery in progress, and it was a car chase. So when I do those sorts of examples, and then I go through the science a little bit without overdoing it, because I could tend to be like really get into the nerd science, that's what seems to hit home with people, and they
Mm-hmm.
understand it because everybody's at least kind of been there. And then really the doing it part, the experiential piece of like, hey, hold a plank and see what happens when you start shaking. That's the same thing as what happens when your nervous system gets activated, and this is what you can do to control it, because there's a mindset component too, when it comes to teaching cops this stuff, like teaching them, we call them cognitive declarations, but it's basically like an affirmation. And even though you may not believe it, you need to tell yourself that, because a lot of times we're operating from our subconscious anyway. And when I explain that and I say, well, if you're in a fight for your life and your backup's not there yet, you don't have the luxury of giving up. So that's how, if you train yourself here, then when you're out there, hopefully it'll translate. It's very similar to any other scenario training, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously a little bit different.
Can you share the 3-step breathing process with us?
Sure. Tactical breathing is um, breathing through your belly, your ribs, and your chest. And so, an inhaling and exhaling from the nose, as long as you don't have a cold, obviously. And then the important part is exhaling longer than you inhale, because when you exhale, that's when you tap into the parasympathetic branch of your nervous system. And so, when you inhale, you're activating, or you're tapping into the sympathetic branch, the fight or flight. So if you can train yourself to inhale and then exhale longer, it's something just I say the same thing to everybody, like, hey, if you want to become stronger, you'll lift weights. If you want to go run distance, you're going to, go out and run every day. If you want this to be something that you can tap into regularly, you can practice breathing in the same way, because you're not only doing this for your nervous system, but you're also using muscles that you don't normally use. You're recruiting your diaphragm, your intercostal muscles, which are those muscles in between the ribs. And then typically we don't really use the full capacity of our lungs when we're inhaling and exhaling.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, in the last couple of years, I never really thought about this before, but never thought I'd have to say this to anybody, let alone did I even realize it, is that breathing exercises can help your lung function. And if you have a respiratory illness like COVID, a lot of times doctors will actually prescribe you to do certain breathing exercises. So it's really beneficial to practice this on so many different levels. So that's essentially what a 3-part breath is.
Oh, interesting. I've um I've never heard the breathing out longer than you breathe in.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. But I have a similar story about that to share, and I've shared it before. About I was going to an 1199 officer down call, and I'm a sheriff's office, so here in California, sometimes not uncommon for you to be 20 minutes from your back, right? And this officer it was actually an allied agency officer with the highway patrol that was out on their own. And so, as happens in that, everybody goes, right? And I was the sergeant in charge of our squad in that geographic region for the day. And so, all the questions are coming to me about who should go, what should we have, should we launch the airship, blah, 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 right? And all this is occurring, the radio's chattering along, and I'm doing like a $130 up the highway, right? Like everybody else to get there. And I noticed my vision starting to narrow to, like, not like narrow pass out, but I was starting to get overloaded
Mm.
with like too many cognitive things were happening at the same time. And I went to my box breathing, which is a similar idea, 4
Mm-hmm.
breaths in, hold for four count of exhale, and then you hold for 4 again.
Mm-hmm.
And I distinctly remember doing that. And I could tell you where on the highway I was when I started it, and where I felt like the world started to open up. I was able to
Mm-hmm.
hear the radio clearly. I saw very clearly what I needed to do, because I was able to keep my parasympathetic nervous system engaged in the conversation around my body and what my body was trying to do. The fight or flight was wanting to take over and wanted to go full throttle into, code black. And I was able to reel that back. And I just distinctly remember that happening. So that's another real world application people can use if they want to look at just the simple
Mm-hmm.
act of breathing and how that helps you out in the field. Uh, as we wrap up, I want to get your opinion on this in terms of yoga and activating our central nervous system to overcome that negativity that we were talking about earlier, and how that really then ties into wellness just in general. But what's your experience, or what can you share with us about how breathing or yoga or both or something different helps us overcome the mental game of fighting negativity?
So, well, one of the things I started saying earlier, one of the things that we do in yoga for first responders is that when you're in a challenging position, so physical position, obviously in the yoga class, but you can really translate that to any challenging position you're in your life. It doesn't have to be physical. And training yourself to flip the script of negativity, because that's our go-to, that's where we go, we're
Mm-hmm.
negative. And so if something becomes physically challenging, one of the first things that might come to mind if you're shaking and you're in a tough position is, this sucks, when is this going to be over, I want to quit.
That's
And
definitely where I go at yoga most of the time.
yeah, trust me, I've been there too. And I know people are saying that to me all the time. But instead, it's, even though it may not seem like you believe it at first, training yourself out of that and saying, I'm prepared for a challenge. I'm strong. I've got this, whatever it is that you want to say. And it's, again, it kind of goes back to that affirmation. And I know it seems kind of goofy to a lot of people, but again, the research has shown that this works. So to help overcome or flip the script of negativity, you kind of start to implement. That's one way to overcome it, especially when you're in the shit's hitting the fan kind of a situation. But really, it can apply to anything. And I know it's not always like that. Like when we have a negative thought, it's not always something like that's life or death. It's just the way we operate. One of the ways that what I've really started to do, and it kind of goes along with being nice to yourself, is just really trying to be a little bit more compassionate with yourself. So, we go to negativity, we go to beat ourselves up. But if we meet ourselves with the same compassion and kindness that we might do to somebody we care about or a friend, that can really go a long way too.
Mm-hmm. Treat yourself as someone you care for, right? Okay,
Yeah.
let's start
Yeah.
there.
Exactly.
Sometimes
Be
that's
your
all we
own
need to do.
coach and not your own critic. So,
Yeah, easier said than done for
oh
most
yeah.
all of us, right? But
Mm-hmm.
to get woo on people, but it really requires the struggle and the deep work of having a relationship with yourself. And that might
Mm-hmm.
sound completely bizarre to someone who's never done any work on it, but it should make absolute sense to anyone who has, that you have a relationship with yourself, whether you realize it or not, just as you have a relationship with your spouse or your kids or your boss. And if we don't identify what that relationship is and the status of that relationship, it is going to cause us problems.
Yep. I couldn't agree more.
Wendy, as we wrap up, where can people find out more about you, learn about your podcast and all the work that you're doing for not only your agency and Yoga for First Responders, but all the other teaching you're doing?
It might be easiest. I'll give you. So I have the Guns and Yoga podcast, as you mentioned. We're on the Podbean is kind of our platform, and then I have my own website. It's wendyhummel.com. I have free yoga videos, the link to my podcast, and information about my coaching program. And anybody can reach out to me at, I'll just give you my personal email, wendy@bluelineyoga.com, but you can also email me about like the work related stuff. And then I can reach out from my work email about the wellness program.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us today. It's always nice to catch up with you. And, I just think what your department is doing with, establishing a wellness office, like, yeah, it has been done, but it's just awesome that someone is willing to do it within their own agency. Clearly your sheriff is a leader there and he sees this as the need, and that you're willing to use your own story to, establish that role and, share from that place. I just think it's fantastic. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. And thanks for what you do.
Well, thank
We
you.
need so many more people to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We do. We're all in this together.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're new to the show, make sure you check through our catalog of episodes because you're going to find some amazing guests and some great actionable ideas you can take into your day. Also, I want to offer you something I'm very excited about, and it's absolutely free. It's my Tactical Tuesday newsletter. Every Tuesday, I want to bring you a few tactics, tips, and strategies to help you succeed in the week ahead. It may be a book I want to share, some gear I found useful, an inspiring quote, or anything else I think you'd like. To sign up for the Tactical Tuesday email list, you can visit thesquadroom.net/Tactical Tuesdays, or just text your email address to 805-364-2331. That's 805-364-2331. If you didn't catch that, check the show notes for this episode, and you can find it there, and I promise we won't sell or spam your email address. Before we wrap up, I have a challenge for you. If you got something out of this episode, if you were inspired by our conversation today, I want to challenge you right now to take a photo of your podcast player as you're playing this episode, and I want you to share it with 3 friends, people who you think need to hear what we talked about today. Send them this episode and recommend that they listen to it. Also, please consider leaving a review on the podcast player of your choice. If you have a few seconds, please leave a comment with your review because it really helps us spread the word about the show and it helps more cops find the valuable lessons that we have here. Also, join us on Facebook at our Facebook group, follow our page, and on Instagram at The Squad Room. Special thanks to our sponsors for today's episode. First, OfficerPrivacy.com. If cleaning up your name on the internet and making it harder for criminals to find you is important, check out the deal they have for you at OfficerPrivacy.com/The Squad Room, where you'll get a free USB data blocker and 1 month of free monitoring when you sign up. Also, special thanks to CommGear Supply. If you're looking for the best prices and industry-leading warranty coverage on your radio equipment, make sure you check them out and use the coupon code TheSquadRoom to get 10% off your order. Also, there are some other great companies who support the podcast and support you as well. Go to thesquadroom.net/support to see exclusive deals from Signature Coins, Hard to Kill Fitness, Onnit, Ranger Up, Hardhead Veterans, and Audible. And if you're looking for the best fitting ballistic helmet that exceeds NIJ standards and won't break the bank, check out hardheadveterans.com and use the coupon code SQUADROOM to get $20 off your helmet. All right, until next time, take care of each other and stay safe.